A while ago, we reviewed the first entry of the adventure book gaming series based on The Princess Bride. While we enjoyed it very much, there were some problems we had with the game, one of the biggest ones being it's a bit too easy for us personally. However, we're now going to look at the third entry in the series, this one based on The Lord of the Rings. Here, you'll go through the entire trilogy, and while it keeps a lot of the core mechanics, including the classic large book for you to play through, it has some new toys for you to mess around with, and we'll see whether they are enough to fix some of the misses we had in our first review. So let's open the book and dive in and see what this game has in store for us. The game in this video was provided to Roll for Crit by its creators or publishers. Only the game was provided for the making of this video. This is the Lord of the Rings version of the adventure book game series, which, by the way, looks like it's based on the movie version of this game. You will play through the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy in order to see the story hopefully reach its conclusion. However, evil still has some ways it may end a little bit early for our adventurers. Now, we've already reviewed the Princess Bride version of this game, but if you haven't watched that, the basic idea of this game series is that this book is filled with multiple chapters going through the storyline, each one having separate challenges and their own rules. You will have miniatures representing the characters who usually appear in almost every chapter. Sometimes you may have tokens representing characters who go in and out, maybe some tokens specific to that chapter. You will move characters, oftentimes in order to reach certain locations to fulfill challenge objectives. At those challenge objectives, you usually need to discard certain cards that match the symbols here. If you do, you will get certain rewards. Sometimes maybe another character appears, sometimes it could change the board layout, sometimes you can get these special cards which grant powerful abilities, and once you finish a chapter, are shuffled back into the main deck, meaning you've made this deck much stronger as you progress through the game. You also have these tokens to mark whenever you complete a chapter, letting you know you can move on to the next one. Your turn will consist of moving a character up to 2 spaces, possibly discarding cards in order to complete challenges or some other rules. Then you'll draw 2 cards from the main deck and then draw a card from the plot deck. This will consist of a number, which then you will use the specific plot card for the chapter to see what happens. Usually it's not something that helpful for you. Now, Lord of the Rings, of course, has more than just putting on a fresh coat of paint that features Lord of the Rings characters. This wouldn't be Lord of the Rings without, of course, the ring. The ring card is a special card that has multiple copies in the main deck. These are very powerful. They have 2 special abilities. The first one is the same regardless of chapter. It can act as a wild. So for example, let's say I had these 2 cards here, but I didn't have another eye for this location. I could discard these 3 cards in order to complete the challenge. The other option is every chapter has a special ring ability specific to that chapter. Usually, it's a great way for you to deal with whatever obstacles are in your way. However, if you've watched Lord of the Rings, you know there's a catch. Whenever the ring is discarded, be it because you used it as a wild or for ability, or discard it for another reason, that gains you a corruption. As you move along this track, it does not reset between chapters. Even if you lose a chapter and restart it again, the ring will be at wherever it was at the end of that win or loss. Whenever you pass over one of these spots with the red eye icon, you will flip over one of these cards, gaining a negative benefit. If the ring reaches Sauron before you finish the campaign, you lose the entire campaign and have to start over from the beginning. Meaning, whenever you get these ring cards, you cannot just use them as much as you want, or you'll build up corruption way too fast. You'll need to decide when it's advantageous to gain corruption in order to move ahead in the chapter. Other than that, the game should play as the rest do, complete all the chapters, make sure to follow the rules, be careful of the unique lose conditions, and of course, in this case, make your way to the end, where hopefully you haven't gained too much corruption, and you'll be able to take on the final challenge. So before we continue, I do want to mention this review is going to be a bit different, starting a new trend of reviews. There are plenty of reviews we have done, and sometimes we review a game that's part of a series, like this case, the Adventure Book Game series. And we may review plenty of titles in there, and more often than not, it feels like it's repetitive sometimes, as their crits and misses may still continue, even if they added new mechanics that feel that were changed in there. If it's part of the series, it just feels like we're reviewing the same thing with maybe a different coat of paint. So what I thought I would try and do, more for things like this that are you could technically buy first or on their own because they're standalone. Sometimes they can mix, is when we hit the usual crits and miss section. Instead, I'm going to compare this with the first entry that we already reviewed. If you want to see the crits and miss for that one, you can watch its review, which maybe will be more informative when you return to this one and see the comparisons where I can say whether they mix or not, whether I think that this one improved or failed to live up to the previous one in some ways. So I felt like this might be a better way to compare games like this one that are part of a larger series where it's more about maybe incorporating different themes rather than really changing up the game. So let me know your thoughts if you think this is a good idea, of course, for something like this, for a more series style game, or at least something that doesn't try to say it's a completely different game. But for now, let's continue on though with The Lord of the Rings. Now, this does share a lot of its DNA, no surprise, to the adventure book game series. It's why I thought about making this whole new change. But it does have some differences. The biggest one, the very obvious one, is the One Ring. And that One Ring, I'll just say it now, is a huge improvement for me. As I stated in the beginning, one of the biggest problems we have with the Princess Bride version is while we loved and enjoyed playing the game, in particular, thematically it fit very well with what was going on of the grandfather telling the kid the story, we didn't feel like we were really pushed or challenged, which we understand is where the game was sort of slotted to fit in terms of difficulty setting, but for us personally, we really wish there was something a bit more. Well, this one brings it without, I think, making it too complex or too punishing for players. The One Ring gives you a huge pressure valve in case you accidentally get stuck in a very tight situation, can't find the right card for a specific challenge. So it gives you a way to actually succeed or get around things that you usually couldn't. However, it comes with a huge price, meaning there's going to be multiple times of you weighing the pros and cons. And more often than not, it's not always going to be an easy pick. That weight isn't always going to be, oh, this is a card you should always use or should never use. It may be something that you don't use right away, but you hold on to, and all of a sudden it could shift really fast because based on what happens with the plot deck, and maybe something spawns that you weren't expecting. And of course, that is always a fun thing when randomness can come out of nowhere. But the ring allows you to maybe get around that. But you can't just weigh on the ring or else you get too much corruption. So mechanically speaking, it just fits, I think, so much in adding that extra layer of complexity without, I think, pushing it too far into a larger weight category in terms of difficulty. And then, of course, thematically, I mean, the ring giving you amazing power, but also corrupting you, it's perfect. It'd be hard to do better for something like that. It does a fantastic job. So for something that fits thematically as well as mechanically so well of what we desired, it's a home run. This isn't to say that there aren't other ways the game has been made more complex or interesting for more heavy seasoned gamers. I do believe the challenges in here have a bit more going on. That being said, I just feel the One Ring just overshadows everything in terms of it just, like I said, it checks all the boxes. I think thematically it's on point, and mechanically it does just the right amount that keeps you engaged with the game and thinking without adding in so many crazy keywords or something that may push this outside of the target difficulty level and weight that this game is hoping to be. So I do think this fixes a lot of what we wanted to see for the adventure book game series, and hopefully the future entries will have some way to have a similar mechanic added that keeps you always thinking about having a choice that could change its value throughout the game without making it something that is either always going to be the same answer, as in never use it or always use it right away, or make it so complex that it'd be hard for people who should be the target audience for this game to actually play it. Now, in terms of some of the issues I think this one does have, I do think actually one of the biggest ones is the fact that they're covering 3 movies, so to speak, here. Yes, it's Lord of the Rings adventure book series, and technically The Princess Bride was based on a movie with a book in it. This is based on a movie based on books. And I do feel a couple times it goes a little fast, and this easily could have been a big 3-parter one, but I think that would have also jumped probably into that area of like, do people want to buy 3 copies of this game and stuff? So I understand why they did it, but I think this one does such a great job. It's disappointing that they didn't break it up. I think easily a lot of people could have been happy, especially, of course, with these books, it would have been cool to see all three stacked next to each other. We probably can get The Hobbit if we want another token entry in the adventure book game series, but I just feel like this one worked well enough that it could have been really fun that each movie or book got its own game. But I just assume that just from marketing, just the idea of having three entries at once from Lord of the Rings and then getting all three might just overload some people, especially with the more entry market I think this game is going for. This is not meant for the people who collect every single Lord of the Rings LCG pack. So I get it, but I do think this game could have gone that way. I wish it did, but that's because I probably lean more towards the over collecting kind of personality. Overall, though, I do feel like Lord of the Rings was a successful entry to the adventure book gaming series. While I feel there are some things that The Princess Bride just does perfectly, it's one of those things when the first entry was almost fit for it. You know, the reason you make mistakes is because someone's telling a story, so maybe they change some things up. Here, you have a plot deck. It's not exactly in canon order, but you're having fun playing the game. I still feel like it has a good job telling the story, even if it feels a bit abbreviated because it fits three movies into there. But with The Ring, you're still going to have a lot of fun being engaged because with that card, you're going to have a lot of power, but you do know that there are consequences attached to it. So that means you aren't just going to be simply trying to color match whatever the challenges need. You're going to pay much more attention to what's happening in the chapter, finding out how much leeway you have in corruption and whether it's worth it to call upon the power of the Cursed One Ring. So let's compare for the adventure book game series, The Princess Bride versus The Lord of the Rings. First, let's look at mechanics. Now, I do believe here that Lord of the Rings does rise above The Princess Bride. There are many slight changes that add a bit more complexity. However, I do believe the one ring card mechanic is what makes it really shine. Thematically, both of these I think do a good job servicing the theme that they're playing to. However, I do believe The Princess Bride does win out here a little bit more because one, I do believe that the original game mechanics fit just a teeny bit better with how the Princess Bride story goes of someone telling the story instead of just the actual story in the book. And two, because this is one movie versus three, The Princess Bride is able to hit more of the main story beats, while the Lord of the Rings one does feel a bit rushed at times. Next up is compatibility. These are for ones that mix and match, and the comparison will probably be more along the lines if I feel one game should be considered the base and the other one the expansion. Here, though, neither game will add components to others within the adventure book game series, so there isn't a reason, mechanically speaking, for you to own multiple copies within the series. This, though, brings us to collectability. When previously we were looking at if owning the entire series was helpful on a mechanical sense, here we're looking at in more of an aesthetic sense, or if it's more reasonable to buy one game over the other based on the current board game landscape. Now, as an entire series, I do actually think these all look very nice on the shelf, so on a collecting sense, I do think both work very well. And both themes actually have plenty of other entries in the world of board gaming. However, I cannot think of one in particular that stands out that I would highly suggest over these when looking for a game that fits this target audience and difficulty level. Finally, crits and misses. Does the Lord of the Rings one fix any of the crits and misses or make it worse compared to the previous Princess Bride? Overall here, I definitely have to say that this fixes a lot of the misses without breaking up any of the crits. I had a lot of fun playing this version, even though I did it solo, and much more excited to share the game because of its game mechanics, rather than simply because I think someone might enjoy the theme. So overall, when you compare the two, I do think both are fun. And if you are a fan of either property, I think you'll probably be happy. That said, in terms of gameplay mechanics, I do feel Lord of the Rings does win out here. I just really love how the One Ring adds that extra bit of sauce. It's not too much. This isn't going to really elevate it to some of the more like advanced strategies that may be very scary for people, especially for those who don't have a lot of experience in board gaming. But it's the perfect amount that's going to make you engaged, always not sure what's the right decision. You're going to have to look at the board and decide whether it's right to use the ring and get that corruption, or whether maybe you can try and hold out without it. And it just added that extra bit that we were looking for from the original Princess Bride one, even if we think story-wise it was going a bit fast here because, you're going over three movies versus one. in the end, I think that that ring idea is something that needs to be carried on through future entries in the adventure book game series. Now, unfortunately, the ring just perfectly slotted in here. I mean, it's the ring, but thematically also it fits perfectly. So I don't know exactly how you're going to do that. That said, the Princess Bride's original plot and redoing chapters fit perfectly with the idea of someone reading a story and then having to change it up a bit because, they read something wrong for their kid. So I imagine that someone who's more creative than I am, at least it depends on the property they get, can come up with a way to add a similar mechanic to future entries. This way, you can still keep a game that's a perfect point for people to join in who maybe are more knowledgeable about the properties but haven't played, hours upon hours of board gamings under their belt, while at the same time still make it enjoyable for those who do play a lot of board games to sit down and play it with them. So, overall, I think this is a positive addition to the series and one that will be a lot of fun. But you can let me know your thoughts in the comments, whether you think that the Lord of the Rings one is a huge improvement, if you enjoyed the Princess Bride more, or if the Wizard of Oz entry that I didn't really talk about is the one that I should be focusing more on. I'd love to hear all your thoughts in the comments down below. Of course, also comment on my new review idea here for more game entry series. It feels like the right thing to do for these things that have like the same sort of core style, but maybe shifts in terms of just like maybe new theme rather than actually a new game. Let me know all your thoughts on that. If you think this is something I should continue for games like this, or if that just doesn't work well and you're fine with me saying that this still hits this specific crit or doesn't succeed to pass this specific miss. I'd love to hear everything from you, but for now, thank you so much for watching to this point. I'm Will, and this has been Roll for Crit.